Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to give an overview. We are now 14 days into the Sentinel League, and I wanted to look at what's been working, what hasn't been working, what the popular ascendancies are, and maybe give you some inspiration for a second build if you're looking for that, or maybe you're starting late and this is inspiration for a first one. So firstly, methodology for this. Grinding Gear Games published the ladder. This is a list of the top 15,000 characters by XP. At the time that I am recording this video, the cutoff point for that is somewhere in the middle of level 96. So you have a bunch of players that are level 96 and up, and that's all you'll be able to see from the ladder. Now this also contains the top 15,000 by solo delve depth as well. So these two groups overlap a lot. It's not 30,000 players, it's something like 19,000 that will be represented on the ladder between the two versions of it, the 15,000 by XP and the 15,000 by solo delve depth. Now, when you combine these, this gives you an overview of the most successful build archetypes, and this information is available to peruse on the website poe.ninja. You can also review the hard modes, so hardcore, solo self-found, or both of them at once, and you'll find that harder game modes do sharply constrain what the successful builds look like. So you start to see less build diversity the harder that the game mode is. Now, one thing that's important to note is that there'll be a small percentage of just genuinely bad information here. Some people finish the league quickly. When they finish the league, they decide to set up some sort of ridiculous meme on their character. Maybe they allocate Avatar of Fire on the passive tree and use brutality support on their character's main attack. Something like that that renders their character completely non-functional. You can filter these people out, or you can just assume that they are a small percentage of the player base, and they generally are. So broadly speaking, they don't have that much impact unless you try and copy individual other players. So the Ascendancy Spread, we have Inquisitor at 19% of the softcore trade-enabled league. Necromancer at 17%, Occultist at 11, Champion at 10, Saboteur at 7, Elementalist also at 7, Ascendant at 6, Raider at 5, Deadeye at 5, Berserker at 3, and then we start moving towards the dregs. Pathfinder, Assassin, and Guardian all at 2, all which are actually pretty okay ascendancies at the moment. We'll get to why they're so underrepresented later. Slayer, Hierophant, Gladiator, and Juggernaut, and Chieftain and Trickster all 1% or less. So what's going on here? This is actually a better spread than we saw in 2020, but it is something that's worse than the last couple of leagues. And that's because there's been no balance changes for a league. People generally know already what the unpopular ascendancies are and why. Trickster, no one's really experimenting with Trickster. People have worked out, oh, okay, if I want to do chaos damage over time, then an Occultist is simply Trickster but better. So I'm going to play that build as an Occultist because it's going to perform better than Trickster. There's no point in experimenting because that's just been settled. The same is the case if you're wanting to play a Poison build. You'd play that as a Trickster if you wanted to, but Assassin does the job better, and so everyone that's interested will play Assassin. That information has percolated throughout the entire Path of Exile community. Now, there will be some change in this as the league progresses. There are a number of build-enabling options that come online later in the league, so things like Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh jewels that at the moment are mostly concentrated amongst the wealthiest players, and particularly things like Ashes of the Stars and Crystallized Omniscience. These are very expensive items currently. As they become more accessible, you'll start seeing more and more people playing around with other builds that might require them. The thing is, though, that this doesn't necessarily fix the ascendancy imbalance. For instance, Crystallized Omniscience can do just as much for an Inquisitor as it can do for a different build like an Assassin that might want to use it. Now, there's also a number of ascendancies that are widely known to be low performers at the moment, and people just aren't experimenting with that much. Now, all of that said, my next build is likely to be a Juggernaut. The off-meta ascendancies that are not named Trickster aren't actually awful. They're just generally a little bit suboptimal, and they do have uses. They pretty much all excel at something. So Chieftain, for instance, doesn't get much play in the softcore world, but in the hardcore world, it's pretty good. The ability to mitigate a lot of damage with it is very good. Juggernaut is pretty weak. It is basically Champion, but worse, except in a couple of weird cases, and that's where I'm going to be exploring with my next build, but there are still some uses for it. Gladiator has a pretty much a lockdown as being one of the best options for physical damage over time builds, and Hierophant and Slayer definitely have their uses too. Really, it is just Trickster that's in the dumpster tier. Okay, so let's move on to defensive styles. Determination, Defiance Banner, and Molten Shell were dominant in patch 3.16. They were dominant in patch 3.17, and guess what? They're even more dominant in patch 3.18. People have realized these are so overpowered that almost every high-level character uses them all. This is even true in softcore, and is even more true when you look at hardcore. The Keystone passive Divine Shield combined with the unique shield Aegis Aurora, are everywhere as well at the moment. This combination is really ridiculously strong. Even individually, they're both very strong options, but combined with the power of Determination and Defiance banner, with Molten Shell providing extra buffer, this is an incredibly powerful defensive package and is probably one of the best things in the game, especially given that Aegis Aurora tends to work so well with Molten Shell. Now, Grace is also somewhat popular, especially with Ghost Stance, but definitely not to the same extent. Discipline sees a lot less use, and Energy Shield is generally the weakest base defense right now, despite Recombinators making crafting Energy Shield gear easier than it's ever been. Fundamentally, we continue to see the 3.16 era shift away from big effective life pools and towards a mitigation focus. This is why we're seeing Aegis Aurora, a shield that doesn't grant life, being one of the best shields in the game, because it just mitigates so much damage and helps you recover quickly when you do take damage. One thing that's noticeable is that Endurance Charge nodes on the passive tree are mostly very unpopular at the moment. Enduring Composure, the cluster jewel that mimics one of the big rewards of being a Juggernaut, is only at 6%, and this is a very strong cluster jewel node. The +1 Endurance Charge passives are seeing very little use. Determination and Defiance banner and Aura effect are outperforming any investment in endurance charges at the moment. If you want to make your character more defensive, the best way to do it isn't to stack life through a small cluster jewel like Fettle. It isn't to take an armor cluster jewel and put Enduring Composure on it. It's actually going Introspection on an Aura cluster jewel so that you can potentially fit one more Aura, but also so that you can make your Determination and your Defiance banner, and if you're using it, Grace, even stronger. So that's why Introspection is actually the best of the cluster jewels for defense currently. So let's have a look at the skills currently. Top 5 performers this league so far. Righteous Fire combined with Fire Trap. Usually this combination takes place on an Inquisitor, but not exclusively. Righteous Fire is just very solid at the moment because Fire Trap addresses its weakness. Its main weaknesses are that it doesn't have all that much single target damage, but Fire Trap can help it with that. And also that it can sometimes struggle to project damage a little bit. But the changed versions of the Maven's Legacy of Fury boots have definitely made that much more doable than it's been in the past. Vaal Lightning Strike is the next most popular build, usually played as an elemental build with Trinity support, often as a champion or raider, sometimes as a berserker. Now there is also a less popular Poison Assassin version that plays somewhat similarly in that they're both Lightning Strike, Vaal Lightning Strike builds, but fundamentally it is mostly the elemental Trinity build that is succeeding at the moment. Number 3 is Skeleton Mages, which is almost always played on the Necromancer. Number 4 is the Physical Trapper archetype, which uses Seismic Trap and Exsanguinate linked trap support, almost always played as a Saboteur. And number 5 is Explosive Arrow Ballista, usually played as an Elementalist and often as a champion. You'll find there's a slightly different list if you look at solo self-found or if you look at hardcore, and most of the things that are in the top 5 there, that are not in the top 5 in trade-enabled softcore, will show up in our honourable mentions, so let's go into those now. Vaal Detonate Dead Ignite. This comes in at number 6, and it definitely earns an honourable mention, being one of the builds that is performing very, very well in hardcore solo self-found. Custom Critical Strike with Cyclone as the trigger skill and Forbidden Rite as the payload. As an Occultist, usually Chaos Inoculation. This is a build that seems to be doing pretty well at the moment. Non-Chaos Inoculation versions are possible, but require much more investment. They do much more damage too. Spark Inquisitor comes next. These are aura stacking versions that use Nebulous and multiple introspection clusters. The introspection cluster down here. This is the auras from your skills have 10% increased effect on you cluster jewel node. It's extremely strong, and these builds will have multiple copies of introspection as well as taking a whole bunch of different aura classes across the tree. Arakali's Fang is next, with Occultist or Necromancer both as options for it. And then there is the Physical Damage Over Time build, which scales Corrupting Fever and usually uses Tornado Shot to apply it to monsters. Although you don't have to use Tornado Shot, if you would prefer to have a Wand and Shield, you can use Kinetic Blast instead, and that certainly works. Anyway, that's all I've got for the moment for this 3.18 meta wrap-up 2 weeks in. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results, and hopefully this has helped you come up with an idea for a second build.